Hi, Year 11. So this is going to take you through how to answer the literature paper 1. It's important to note the paper's split up into 2 papers. So first of all, you'll do power and conflict poetry. That's a 50-minute exam. You've got 5 or 10 minutes to plan there. They won't tell you this, but you need to spend that time planning. And then you've got 40 to 45 minutes writing. And then Frankenstein is the exact same. So 50 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes to plan, 40 to 45 minutes writing. The invigilators will come after the power and conflict poetry exam and take the papers in from you, and then they will give out the Frankenstein paper there as well. So you won't be able to take anything you've done in power and conflict poetry into the next kind of exam there. You'll have a little kind of 2 or 3 minute break to kind of get in the right headspace for the Frankenstein paper. So just bear in mind that's the format of the paper. So we're going to talk you through here what you need to do in the 2 sections of the paper. So as previously mentioned, power and conflict poetry is the first section, the first paper you're going to do on a Wednesday morning. You'll be given a question that asks you to compare how an idea or theme is presented in a given poem and one other poem from Power and Conflict. So they will give you a theme, which is what you should look at first, and then they'll give you a poem. So they'll give you the full copy of that poem, so you don't need to worry about remembering quotations from that because you'll have it in front of you. You will also be given a list of all 15 poems and poets, which is quite useful because in the exam you can be struggling to think about, oh, what's that one about this, or who wrote that, and it's good to kind of refer to the poets by name in your answer. You need to remember you're comparing how the idea or theme is presented to a second poem, and this is quite an area of confusion because there's no such thing as a right second poem. I think there are about 300 of you in year 11, and you could all potentially pick a different, second poem of the 15 to compare it and potentially still be right. So the main thing is to look at the question focus, look at the idea or theme, and think about using a second poem that would answer that question well. That could well be a poem you've revised in a lot of detail. It could be a poem that's your favourite poem that you're probably going to try and use whatever. It could be a poem that kind of is about a different thing or a different idea to the poem in the question, a different way of presenting the same idea, or it could be about a poem that's very similar. It doesn't matter as long as it answers the theme in the question. And it's important to note the examiners, sometimes you might have an examiner who's just taught the love and relationships cluster. They'll be given a list of more obvious poems that would compare well with a given poem, but you can write about anything. So if you've got an Effects of War and it was Charge of the Light Brigade, there's no other poem really like Charge of the Light Brigade in the anthology for the way war's presented. So you could pick any other poem that talks about the effects of war, really, that might give a different kind of view of that. You might look at kind of difficult situations in war, or post-traumatic stress disorder. You might think about Remains if you were given that and compare it to War Photographer. So you can pick poems that are similar, you can pick poems that are different, but the main thing is that they answer the idea or theme in the question. So the other issue, once you've kind of picked your poems, is thinking about what you need to do to succeed. I still stand by this claim. I think this is one of the hardest questions you have to do in any GCSE, not necessarily in terms of difficulty, but in the amount you've got to do in the time you've got. So in 45 minutes, you've got to write 2 to 3 detailed comparison paragraphs, really. So you're talking about poem 1 and then poem 2, and then why they're similar or different. Poem 1, poem 2, why they're similar or different. And some of you will only be able to do that in the 45 minutes, and that's absolutely fine. If you could do another 2 paragraphs comparing similarities and difference, that would be fine as well. But you need to do detailed points talking about why the poems are similar and different, why the writers have written the poems, why have they included the idea in the question. So you're answering the question there, not just showing you've revised 2 poems. Use short quotations to support your ideas and analysis. This is something that you get marked for poetry, for Frankenstein, for The Unseen, for Macbeth, and it's a skill that you're kind of really good at anyway, we know. But just to remind you, you've got to do that. And you should be aiming to do that in every paragraph you can. Analyse how both poets use methods. That's language, structure, or form. It's entirely up to you, really, which one you use. The mark scheme mentions methods. It doesn't say you've got to talk about language and structure and form. It just mentions methods. So stick to the ones you feel you can discuss best. And obviously it's to do with the depth of your analysis, really, to the number of marks you get. So can you really zoom in on detail in individual words or phrases and how they're used to create meanings, and how they have an effect on the reader as well, whatever that is. And then finally, kind of for 1 or 2 paragraphs in your essay, you should be aiming to explore context or ideas. So you're not just giving us a one-line history lesson, you're exploring about why the ideas are similar or different. So in a previous slide, I mentioned Remains and War Photographer as an example of 2 poems where the narrators suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. But why do they suffer differently? You know, one, for instance, has seen armed conflict in Iraq. One is the kind of the guardsman Tromans in Remains, the shooter in Remains is suffering from the guilt of his actions, whereas in War Photographer it's all secondhand, and you know he's got the double kind of negative experience of taking all these photographs but not affecting society at all. So think about those ideas in detail probably once or twice in your essay. And the other thing to say for analysis, that can either come from the poem they give you in depth, or it can come from a quotation you revised from a second poem. It's difficult to balance really that kind of analysis in depth, but if you know, it can come from anywhere as long as it's a couple of times in your essay. So it might be a quotation from the poem you get given that you analyse in detail. It might be one that you've already remembered. It doesn't matter, but you do need to analyse in detail, and it's analysing methods and how they're used. So top tips when you get into the exam. First of all, you've got to read the question carefully. What is the theme or idea? That is genuinely more important than the poem that you're going to get given. They will give you whichever poem they're going to give you of the 15. You've covered all 15 of them in class. You will know them. There are some that you'll like more than others. There's some that you will know more than others. But look at the theme first, because it's not just a case of, oh, I'm going to revise this poem and compare it to this poem. What's the theme or idea, and what would compare well with that? Look then at the poem you've been given and take a moment just to think about what you know about that poem, remind yourself of that poem because it might not be one you've revised in detail. So what do you know about it? What happens in the beginning, middle and end? And what 2 to 3 quotations could you analyse in depth from that poem? That they're probably going to come from the beginning, middle and end. Then you need to think of a second poem which compare well with that given poem. So this is where you're thinking, right, okay, which of those poems goes quite well? Remember, you should be guided by the idea in the question or the theme of the question. So if it's the effects of war or the power of man or nature. And remember that the question's not saying find me a poem that's exactly the same. It's how would ideas compare well? So you can have a poem that's different in its approach and be right, and that's absolutely fine. But look at the theme in the question because that'll guide you there. And then plan your answer. Write down the 2 or 3 quotations you're going to use from the given poem, which you've probably done already, so don't waste your time rewriting them again. And think about the 2 or 3 from the poem you've chosen to compare, the one you've revised, the one you've remembered and you think fits best. What words are you going to pick out for detailed analysis? What ideas are present in both poems, and how and why are they similar or different? So that should take you about 5 or 10 minutes to do those steps. I know we talk through it quite slowly here. And then you get on in 40 to 45 minutes writing your essay. There is a lot to fit in for that question, so you need to be prepared to write for the entire 40 to 45 minutes. Again, physically, this will be a demanding question because you've got to fit in quite a lot there. Remember, the order you should write about it is poem 1, then poem 2, and then why the ideas are similar or different in each paragraph. And to help you structure your answer, you might want to talk about the beginning of the poem and then the end of the poem. You know, so what are the ideas at the start of poem that you're given to do with the power of man or nature or war? What are they like in the second poem? Why are they similar or different? And then just do that for the ending. That's quite a nice structure, and it helps guide your analysis you're going through because you're discussing what's at the start, what's at the end, and why that start leads to the ending of the poem there. And so we've just included this slide here, a comparison basically, just a reminder, it's what is similar and what's different about the 2 poems. Really, as long as you are answering about the ideas in the poems, and as long as you're trying to engage with the theme in the question, you will find that you are comparing naturally. It's something students worry about. It's quite an artificial skill, to be honest, to compare 2 things. You know, the poets who write these poems don't write them expecting them to be compared to something else. And it's really important to note that no 2 poems are the same, and the meanings and ideas in all poems aren't the same either. You know, you might revise Extract from the Prelude as the poem about the mountain, but within that, you know, it's the poem about the narrator stealing the boat, seeing the mountain, and then the kind of the mental trauma that he's caused at the end. So in the beginning, middle, and end, there's 3 different things going on there. So you can compare techniques. So, this one uses a simile and this one uses a simile, but I think it's much better to try and compare ideas behind the poems, what's in the writer's mind when they're writing these. And a good structure for this is what we call both, however. This has been picked up in the AQA Examiner report as a nice idea. And essentially what it means is it forces you to write 3 paragraphs if you can, 2 definitely. So both Poppies and War Photographers show the effects of war through painful memories for their narrators. This is one from an assessment you did in year 10. Then you do an analysis of a quotation from both poems. So you've got your Poppies analysis, War Photographer analysis, and then compare ideas. That will probably take you a good 15-20 minutes to write that up because you're analysing 2 poems there in one paragraph. Then you do the same and you're thinking about a different area of the poem. So you might, this might be looking at the beginning here, this might be looking at the end. The psychological effects of war leads their narrators isolate themselves from society. Then you do the same thing. So a different quotation analysis for Poppies, different for War Photographer, and then you compare the ideas. And then finally, if you've got time, however, you can think about a difference between the poems. So what's the difference between these poems here, which you may have already done in your essay, but it's just a nice way of structuring your comparison there. So as an activity for your revision tonight, one of the best things to do is start having a little look at what if this comes up. This is the question stem. Your question will look like this tomorrow, and obviously you'll be given a poem with it. Compare the ways poets present theme, whether that is a broader theme such as power and conflict we've seen recently, which would kind of mean you could talk about any poem there. Whether it's nature or man or war or memories or loss, whatever it is, compare the ways poets present a theme in a named poem and in one other poem from Power and Conflict. So using this template, what we want you to do is have a little go at planning how you'd answer the following questions. So thinking about, compare the ways poets present memories in Poppies and in one other poem from Power and Conflict. And what might be quite useful is thinking about all the poems that would go well with Poppies. And then I've seen some students use the checklist of poets as a way of kind of saying, well, there's no way I'm going to discuss that. I hate that poem, so I'm not doing that one. I like that one, so that might be a maybe there. So thinking about all the poems you could use to compare, and then from that starting to narrow it down to the one you are going to compare. You only discuss one other poem as well. You haven't got the time to talk about a second, and you get no marks for it. So stick to one and make that decision quite quickly in your planning time as well. We've got compares the ways poets present the effects of war in Charge of the Light Brigade and one other poem from Power and Conflict. Compare the ways poets present the power of nature in Kamikaze and one other poem from Power and Conflict. And compare the ways poets present the power of man in Checking Out My History and one other poem from Power and Conflict as well. So we've tried to pick the poems that haven't come up before. We're not trying to predict what's going to come up. It's a dangerous game playing that, but just getting used to some of these perhaps less common poems. If they were to come up, what would you do? So what I'd like to do is pause this video here and then spend probably about 5 minutes, right? What would you do if it was each of these questions? And this is then an activity that you can start looking at home as well. So you can start thinking about, okay, these are all the poems that could answer that question. And this is the one that I'm going to discuss. Okay, so Frankenstein is going to be the second exam paper you've got to do on Wednesday morning. So just remember, what will happen at the end of Power and Conflict Poetry, the invigilators will come round and they will collect in your paper and all the kind of the where you've done your writing, and then they will hand out your Frankenstein paper. There are lots of you, so this could take a good 5 to 10 minutes there. So in that time, what's happened in Power and Conflict Poetry has been and gone. You can't afford to be dwelling on that. Use the time to be thinking about your Frankenstein quotations, the points of context and idea that you're going to include, thinking about, right, if it's the victor, I'm going to say this. If it's the creature, I'm going to say this as well. But seriously, don't use that time to dwell on Power and Conflict answer. It will be what it will be. You've done all you can, and we'll talk about it at the end of this video, but they're marked positively. So, even if it's tissue or that poem you really don't like, that you really don't want to come up, and you're petrified about it, actually, as long as you've done your analysis, as long as you've answered the question as well as you can, you'll find you've actually done quite well. So use that time. It's really important. Put it behind you and think about what you can use for Frankenstein. And when you get that Frankenstein paper, it should be a case of, right, okay, you can start writing and you're just going to get all your ideas down on paper. You should be chomping at the bit, ready to go. You're going to be given a question that asks you to explore how a character or a relationship between two characters or a theme or a bit of a combination of them is presented in an extract from the novel and in elsewhere in the novel. So the 2 bullet points. We don't know which one it'll be. It's been a mixture of them. Historically, it's been how a character presents a theme. So you've seen things like Victor Frankenstein as a victim, the monster as an evil character. We've seen in the past even things like the relationship between Victor and the creature. We've seen themes like grief and loss. But I think what you've kind of realised is that whatever question comes up, you are probably going to discuss another character. So if you get Victor and you're talking about Victor as evil, then you're probably going to discuss the creature as another evil character too, and that's absolutely fine as well. You're going to be given an extract and you must engage with the extract. You must write a paragraph on the extract and the wider novel, minimum paragraph on the extract, minimum one on the wider novel, but you probably write more. And it may ask you to explore how far a character is presented. So how far is Victor presented as an evil character? And obviously what that means is you can disagree with the statement. It's not language paper 1 question 4 though. What you do is you just think about, right, okay, well, Victor is an evil character when he spurns the creature. He's an evil character when he's solely interested in his own gain, but he is a victim when the creature murders Elizabeth. And also actually the creature is more of a victim because of Victor's behavior there. So you can disagree with the statement. It's not really about the statement, it's about where's Victor good, where's Victor bad, where's the creature good, where's the creature bad. And it means you can include other characters, even if it might specify just one in the question. So as with poetry, what do you need to do when you go in? Well, you need to write 1 or 2 paragraphs about how the character or theme is presented in the extract, and then 2 to 3 paragraphs about how the character or theme is presented in the rest of the novel. If you could write 4 paragraphs in the 40 to 45 minutes you've got, that would be perfect. It depends on the extract you get, really. If you get an extract that there's a lot of language or ideas that you can explore in there, then you might write 2 paragraphs on that extract. If the extract you get isn't particularly good for you, or you don't feel there's a lot you can say, you might only write 1. You must write about the extract, but then you might kind of spend the rest, you might have got a really nice essay plan for Victor that you've been revising at home, all these quotations and none of them in the extract. So just pay it lip service, do a paragraph on it, and then analyse from elsewhere in the novel. Use short quotations to support your ideas. Analyses how Mary Shelley uses methods. So these are the same from Power and Conflict Poetry, same for Macbeth, same for Unseen. And remember, methods includes language, structure and form. I'd probably expect most of that to be language analysis from Frankenstein, but you can also include things like when characters arrive, structural devices like cliffhangers at the end of chapters, Victor's many fits that he has in the novel that means he's kind of out of action, and kind of, parallels between Victor's upbringing and the creature's upbringing, that sort of structure. You need to analyse how Shelley creates meaning. So how does she use these methods to create meaning, to create layers of character, and explore context or ideas about the character or theme in the question. And remember, that's just not a one-line history lesson. You're not telling me about Luigi Galvini and Aldani's experiments. You're not just saying this represents the nature-nurture debate, full stop. That in itself could be quite a lengthy paragraph in your essay because you're exploring meaning there as well. So make sure you're kind of discussing those ideas in detail. So when you get into the exam, the first thing you need to do is read the question carefully, look at what the character or theme is in the question or the relationship between 2 characters. Read it carefully as well, because it might be, that you see the words Victor Frankenstein, and so, it'll say something like, is Victor Frankenstein a victim or is the creature a victim? And that doesn't mean just tell me everything you know about the creature. It means think about where he is both a victim and where he's evil. So make sure you're actually answering that question. So just take a minute and have a little look through that and write down what you already know that'd be useful in answering that question, including any quotations you've remembered. And again, you'll probably do this in the first kind of 30 seconds of the exam. The biggest challenge will be trying to find it in the actual booklet, because it's the 19th century novel. There's a range of texts that other schools can study, so you've got to kind of filter through, find the Frankenstein question, and then have a little read. Okay, it's this character. This is what I know about that character. These are the quotations I'm going to use. Then you look at the extract. Is it from the beginning, middle and end? It will tell you at the top. How is the character or theme in the question presented in the extract? So it might be the end of the novel. It might be the creature about to go and end his life. So how is he presented as a victim within the extract? Or how is he presented as evil within that extract? And then find 1 or 2 quotations from the extract that support that, which are going to make up your paragraph. Then plan your answer, highlight and annotate the 1 or 2 quotations you're going to use from the extract, And then you should have written down the 2 or 3 from elsewhere in the novel that you're going to use already. So you've got your essay plan there, and just make sure you're picking quotations that allow in-depth analysis. For Frankenstein, the shorter the better. You know, you've got quotations like wretch, vile insect, really useful 1 or 2 word quotations that you can use to explore Victor and the creature and their behaviour with each. And then make sure you're including 1 or 2 wider ideas. That's probably going to be nature versus nurture for both Victor and the creature. And it's probably going to be the ideas of, you know, scientists breaking the laws of nature, ethical boundaries to play at being God there as your 2 kind of ideas, depending on the question. And then same as poetry, 40 to 45 minutes writing your essay. There is a lot to fit in there as well, particularly if you're going to have some of those wider contextual debates. So be prepared to write for the entire time. You should aim to write 4 paragraphs as a minimum about how the character theme is presented, and that should be at least 1 on the extract, 2 if it's a good extract, and then 2 to 3 elsewhere in the novel if you can. But make sure you've got that range from across the beginning, the middle, and the end. So obviously, I think you've done quite a lot of past papers on Frankenstein. You've done a lot of essays. One of the biggest issues that comes out of that is students don't tend to discuss the importance of the ending in the novel. It helps, I suppose, if you get an extract from the ending, but that has been a past paper. So you need to make sure you're exploring the ending, and you can do that in a couple of ways. You can do it as an analysis paragraph in its own right about the ending. You know, lost in darkness and in distance is the last line of the novel. We can talk about how the creature was always lost in darkness, the darkness of humanity, or in distance, you know, his hamartia, the fact that he was never going to be part of the human race. So you can do it that way as a standalone paragraph that you've learned. Or you can talk as part of a paragraph from the start of the novel and how it leads to the death of Victor and potentially the creature at the end. So you need to understand how the ending ties in with the rest of the novel, and we get you to character map for this and look at where characters fit in. And one of the ways to do this is an empathy graph, where you map out characters on this graph and show where they fit in. And it's also quite useful as an essay plan for the exam tomorrow as a bit of a last-minute revision. So if I just talk you through this one, and then you can have a go at your own. This is one for the creature. So I've done him as a purple line, so you would have to do one for Victor. The only thing missing from here is where I'm going to put my quotations, where am I going to put my ideas as well. So this is basically the creature's journey throughout Frankenstein, and whether we feel empathy for him as a reader or whether we feel no empathy. And I suppose what you could do there is, if we feel empathy for somebody, they're probably going to be a victim. If we don't feel any empathy for them, then they are not a victim. And what you can see is the creature is both victim and evil, and then kind of a bit of both really at various stages of the novel. So at the beginning, he's presented as an innocent creature, and then he's rejected by Victor. He's left to fend for himself, so we feel massive amounts of empathy. He is a victim. What you need is a couple of quotations from him there as well. It's important to note that he is responsible for the murder of several people in the middle of the novel. He vows revenge on Victor Frankenstein, kills William and frames Justine, murders Henry Clerval in retaliation, takes revenge on Victor by murdering Elizabeth. So that's some quotations there, you know, simple quotations you could use. I shall be with you on your wedding night as the threat to Victor. The deliberate choice of the wedding night, meaning that Victor's marriage to Elizabeth is null and void. The fact that he's well within his rights to want this as a form of justice for Victor destroying the female creature in front of his eyes. And then the fact that, you know, the novel ends before he kind of vows to go and destroy himself, and whether we believe him or not. So you've got a quotation from the beginning, quotation from the middle, quotation from the end, and basically what's happening and whether this character's a victim or not. And then obviously what you can do then is start to include the quotations. There's going to be an extract from somewhere in here that you're going to use as part of this as well, which would kind of take over one of these paragraphs. So plot out this for Victor Frankenstein. Think of quotations you'd use at various points to talk about the creature as well. And this is quite good to have with you as a means of kind of essay planning as you go into the exam tomorrow morning. So hope you got something out of this session. You should have had a little go at some of the the tricky poetry questions, thinking about what you're going to say. For Frankenstein, it's just some last minute revision. Again, if the character graph doesn't work for you, make sure you've got beginning, middle and end essay plans. Make sure you're thinking about what you're going to say. Here's a couple of top tips for both papers though, just for tomorrow. First of all, for power and conflict poetry, make sure you read the theme in the question first, then pick out 2 or 3 quotations from the given poem that best explore this theme. So whatever poem they give to you, these are the 2 or 3 things I'm going to say about this poem. Plan your answer. What other poem goes well with that? Take time in the exam to think about that. You'll be under pressure. Don't rush in and pick something straight away that might not be particularly a good comparison. Think about what you're going to say. And then compare. Comparison means why the ideas in the poem similar or different. And make sure you do that in each paragraph you're writing. Make sure you're discussing ideas. If you're doing that, you're talking about context. So you'll get kind of double marks there, if that makes sense. If the poem given to you is one that you haven't revised in depth, or one that you don't like, or one that you feel you can't answer, don't worry, don't be alarmed. Treat it like an unseen, but an unseen you've actually seen before. We have covered them all in class, so you will always have a copy of it, so you will be able to pick out 2 or 3 quotations from that as well. And remember, your analysis for the poem you compare to it might be better than the one that they actually give you, and that's absolutely fine as well. So for instance, if you were to get the Emigre and you were to get the Power of Man and compare it with Checking Out My History, and you've revised Checking Out My History in lots of detail, your analysis for Checking Out My History might be better than the Emigre. You're going to pick out the 2 or 3 quotations you can for that, and then you can do the comparison, but your analysis might be better. Your ideas for Checking Out My History might be better. That's okay. Treat it like an unseen you've seen before. The most important thing to say is be positive. It is a tough exam, and it's a hard thing to do. Comparison of poetry is quite an artificial skill, and it's important to note you're marked positively for what you can say about the poems. Some subjects, if you don't do something, you lose a mark. For literature, it's the opposite. It's a case of we put your essay into a band, we read it again, we decide how good it is, and we put it into a band there as well. So we're looking to give you credit for everything you can say about those poems, whether it's ideas, whether it's analysis in depth. So it's not a case of we take a mark off because you didn't do this or you didn't mention this. It's all about trying to mark you as positively as I can. So basically show the examiners what you know about these poems, even if that is a difficult poem, and make sure you spend the 40 to 45 minutes writing, kind of tying into that. This will be difficult, your hand will hurt. Make the most of the break between the papers and after the Frankenstein exam, because this is a demanding exam. But if you're spending that 40 to 45 minutes writing, you will have a quality answer that an examiner can't help be positive about. Frankenstein's very similar. Read the character or theme in question first, work out where it comes from in the novel, and then pick out 1 or 2 quotations from the extract that support the character or theme in question, whether it's Victor as a victim, the creature as evil, a theme like grief or loss. Plan your answer. Make sure you include analysis from the beginning, middle and end of the novel. Make sure you're discussing the ending and how the beginning leads to the ending, or the ending is a separate paragraph. Make sure you're including analysis in depth and ideas in depth 2 to 3 times in your essay. If you put a full stop after the phrase nature versus nurture, you haven't discussed that idea in any depth. You haven't thought about how nature ties in with the creature's upbringing and how Victor's nurture or the creature's nurture has an impact on future events. If the question is on Victor, you can mention the creature and vice versa. You might see the creature referred to as the monster as well in the question. It's up to you what you call him. Creature, monster is fine. But if your question's on Victor, you can talk about the creature, because it'll be how far is Victor presented as something. But as part of that discussion, you might want to include the creature, who would be the opposite. Same for poetry. Be positive. You are marked positively for what you can say about the characters in the novel. They're not trying to catch you out. They're not trying to give you difficult questions. English literature is an untiered exam, so everyone does the same paper, whether they're getting grade 1s or grade 9s. So it should be something accessible. It should be something you can write about. And again, just make sure you spend that 40 to 45 minutes writing, discussing those ideas and analysis in depth. And most of all, good luck. Come and find us after the exam. Let us know how it went. We'll be able to talk you through. There will be things. These are 2 difficult questions, but it is marked positively, and we are confident that you will go and show the examiners how great you are.